Welcome to the Adopt Well podcast, where we discuss helpful topics for anyone touched by adoption. I'm your host, Macy Peralt, here with my co-host, friend, and fellow adoptive mama, Amy Bagwell. Today we're talking with Sharda Dufresne. Sharda is a transracial adoptee who grew up in a closed adoption. Over the last year, she's been able to reconnect with some of her birth family, and today she'll be sharing the ups and downs of that journey with us. Here at Adopt Well, we believe one of the most powerful ways to learn is to listen to the stories and experiences of other members of the triad. Sharda's heart to rise up and bravely tell her story is so inspiring. She surely doesn't owe it to us, but her willingness to share is such a blessing. We hope you'll lean in, and we're confident that you'll really enjoy today's conversation.
Okay, Sharda, welcome to the show. You've really become a good friend to me through just brainstorming about this podcast episode, which has been very fun. And I can't wait for everybody to learn from you similarly to how Macy and I have. So obviously we're going to hear a good bit of your story today and the reunification aspect of what you've experienced lately. But before we get to all that, just give us a quick overview of who you are, what your general life story is.
I am a wife to one and a mama to two boys, and we live in sunny Southern California in a city called Long Beach. And I was in a closed transracial adoption. That's kind of where my adoption story began. And for those who don't know what a closed or a transracial adoption is, in the most basic of terms, transracial is just an opposite race adoption, usually between the adoptee and the parents. And closed, it can vary, but basically means that most of my basic birth information was not available to me through the finalization process.
What age were you when you were adopted?
Yeah, great question. So I was finalized when I was 6.
Okay, so growing up in a closed adoption, which just as a side note, most adoptees in our generation did grow up in a closed adoption. What was the conversation like, if any, about your biological family?
Yeah, I mean, we started early and often. My mom was never shy about my birth story, and she allowed to give information, obviously, according to my age. Some of that was led by me if I was just basic questions of observation in regards to oh, mom, you look different than I am, or you have, different hair texture than I do, or even family members look different than I do. That was kind of the first point of communication about adoption. And I was probably only 3 or 4, just learning basics of colors and categories of people. And so she started a conversation talking about you didn't grow in mommy's tummy, just some of those basic statements of as much as I would have loved for you to grow in my tummy, you didn't. You grew in another woman's tummy. And then as I got older, obviously more questions were more a little bit in depth. And so questions of, who do I have brothers or sisters? I noticed my friends have siblings, or, why do I look different? And so then my mom started, exploring more into my birth story. And especially as I got into more of my adolescent teen years, I had already known the fullness of my story. I think because it was closed, there wasn't much to disclose. And so a lot of our conversation wasn't so much, she's unfolding this big, massive story. A lot of it was just conversations of, how do I deal with grief and loss when I don't know much of anything?
You're right.
That was more of my journey and our, continued conversation until the last year of, how do I continue to lean into the grief and the loss, and then also be an adult that is learning to accept my story and to move forward in my story and embrace it.
Yeah, what your story is so interesting. So right now, correct me if I get any of these facts wrong, but you're actually kind of in the middle of reunifying with your biological family.
Correct.
So I'm curious, one, obviously, about all that, but also if you remember a time specifically in your life of when you began wondering about would you meet them? Is that a possibility? Did you want that to happen? All those questions that you may have pondered over the years.
Yeah, I would probably say I grew up, it's kind of ironic, but I grew up in like, the Oprah show era. And I think when I was a teenager, I was like, man, Oprah knows a lot of people. Maybe I could write to her and ask her to find my family. And so that was honestly like the
Oh,
first like
oh my
moment
God.
of honesty of like, Oprah can find anyone, let's do it. And so I wrote her this letter. I never sent it. I think just because there were fears and unknowns and even the possibility of disappointment of her not ever responding or just never finding my biological family. But I think that's what I kind of remember as I recall of like, I think I was thinking about Oprah finding my family. And because I
Oh,
had conversations with my adopted mom, it was just clear that we just didn't have much to go off. So I think I just knew my birth mother's name, and then I had siblings, and that I was the third of four. And um, yeah, and that was really it. My mom definitely tried to find my birth mom and just didn't get very far, which later was revealed the reasons why. But yeah, and so there wasn't any resentment or anger. It was just I really just had to accept everything because I just had such limited information. But yeah, probably when I was a teen, I started thinking, I wonder, yeah, who these people are. If I pass them on the street, would I know? Those type of things. And because I didn't know location, it always was like I could be living in the same city or they could be cross country and we'd obviously never meet. So yeah, but that I would want to say probably my early teens, I started really thinking about my biological family and just noticing other family dynamics of my friends. And most of them did have siblings. And so I think more so my heart was to find my siblings um, over than, really trying to find my birth mom. And I think a lot of it's just I have overall a healthy relationship with my adoptive mom. And so I don't feel like I had to necessarily fill a role that I was lacking. Um, but yeah, the sibling desire was there to search. And so it was discouraging over the years because I mean, I really didn't have anything to go off. We definitely tried Facebook when that came out. I'm totally dating myself, but when that came out in high school, I was like, oh, let me search some names and like just came up, empty handed. But yeah, definitely feelings of who are they and do I look like them? And yeah, some of those, questions that I think most adoptees would start asking themselves.
Yeah, and that does make sense that you would have questions. I mean, that's so much to not know about where you came from. Did you ever talk with your mom about getting to know your biological family or finding your biological family?
Yeah, I feel like, gosh, maybe the last 2 or 3 years of high school, I think as I was approaching like what I thought was adulthood at 18, um, I was just like, I'm going to go take on the world. And this is definitely one area that I want to explore. And I was so appreciative because my mom never once held back information or the exploration of me finding my birth family. And that was such a gift. And I think a lot of it, um, she was secure in who she was and did a lot of research and education before adopting, knowing that there could be a chance of reunification. And so I think she did a lot of her own work too, of just, being open enough to have dialogue about this and um, honoring the fact that this might be a path I take and, knowing full well what it could look like to reunify, the depths of that and the uncertainties of that as well. So we definitely, gosh, all the time in different seasons. Some seasons, I feel like I was grieving more, and so we talked probably a lot more about reunification. And I bet other seasons I was so busy with other things that reunification was kind of on the back burner. But I do recall like sitting on the bus in my senior year thinking, I'm about to graduate and what do I want to do next and where do I want to go and how do I want the trajectory of my life to look? And reunification was definitely at the forefront. I think really for me, because it was a closed adoption, it was more so these two questions lingered because I know I very much knew nothing was, do my siblings even know I exist? And will they want to get to know me? Like those were the major, kind of cliffhanger questions that I had. And I think there were times where I had more courage in, wanting to search, and other times fear was really there. Because I think as an adoptee, you kind of, you try to watch maybe, you know, aspects or relationships that could end in what you think is rejection. And so I think that's what was, kind of at the forefront when I thought of those things of reunifying.
Yeah, definitely. What did it look like when you did reunify?
Yeah. So crazy enough, um, it was a year ago now. And I remember I was kind of in the midst of having a very young infant. And I really I was in my backyard and I was like, you know what, Lord, as much as I want to pursue reunifying with my siblings, I'm just not in a season to do that. Motherhood is very much taking over, which it should be. And I was like, let's just put this on the shelf. And I just kind of felt at peace with it. And there was kind of just a sense of surrender and knowing that that's not something I'm going to never touch again, but it just wasn't the season. And so 2 weeks later, I was in urgent care with my mom for something. And I get a phone call from from a number I didn't know. And I was like, this is odd. So I let it go to voicemail and then I saw that there was a voicemail left. So I decided to listen to it. And it was a lady on the phone that was pretty much saying, she's like, hi, this is my name. And if this is who you are, I believe I'm your sister. And I know this sounds super crazy, but call me back if you
No
want
big
to.
deal.
Yeah, no big deal.
You
Yeah.
thought it was like, pick up your prescription or something.
Right. And I'm just like in the room with the doctor, and the doctor looked at me and was like, are you okay? You kind of just turned colors. And I'm like, well, I think my life just changed. And so,
Oh, man.
yeah, so I stepped out, and luckily, ironically, I was so glad that my mom was there. And so I stepped out. I just kind of briefly said, like, I need to call this number back. And so I stepped out and I called the number back. And sure enough, we kind of did some like, is this who you are? This is the story that I've been, researching and learning. Does this sound anything like you? And I was like, yeah, that sounds a lot like me. And so that was the first phone call I had with my biological sister.
Wow.
I just can't imagine what that would feel like. Okay, so I want to know all about like what has it been like since now you have now met someone who shares the same DNA as you.
Yeah. So because I was so blindsided by the call, and I really thought growing up I would be the one pursuing reunification on whatever that level that looks like, mainly between my siblings. Um, it took me a good couple days to just be in it. It was a very surreal, overwhelming feeling. Um, and with the conversation that I had with my sister, I found out information about my mom, our birth mom. And so for the longest time, I didn't think she was alive. So I think most of my emotions was grappling with the fact that my birth mom is actually alive and well.
Oh,
And
man.
that I have opportunity to ask questions.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, the couple days where, um, like I just was in my head a lot, just trying to think through things. And my two older siblings, they were placed together. They were in foster care until they were 13, and then they got adopted together because my sister fought really hard to keep them together as a unit.
Oh.
Yeah, and so she was explaining to me that, there were seasons where they really wanted to, like, search for my younger brother and I, but they also felt like they weren't ready, and so they've been waiting for, you know, 10, 15 years to really start this process, and then, through a series of events, she just really felt like the Lord was leading her to be more active in pursuing to find us, and so it's reunifying. So they were already at a point in life where they were ready and waiting. And I'm so grateful for the fact that they're allowing me to take it slow even today. Um, it's still taking me time to, it's that, the tension of like, we share blood, but you're still strangers and we're learning to become friends. And so there's times where I feel like maybe there's expectations that should look a certain way and I'm maybe not there yet. And they're understanding that I'm just taking it really slow, and that they've been, like I said, they've been waiting. So they've kind of already asked their own questions of themselves when they, and thought of reunification for so long, and the reality of that. And so this last year really has been kind of like a push and pull in my own heart and in how I go about building these relationships with them. I think in spaces where I feel most comfortable. And like I said, I'm so grateful that they're not rushing me or having these major expectations that I should already, be where they are. And that's been such a gift. So we met 2 weeks after that phone call. I met her and my younger brother and
Wow.
at an IHOP, which I don't recommend, as your life is changing. And then they also had connected with our birth mama, so we FaceTimed. And so it was, first time I saw my mom was a year ago, and that was surreal. And it was really sweet. I tell people, I think there's so many things that you think about when you're reunifying. It's like, are they going to like me? What are they even going to be like? Are we going to have similarities? Are we going to be completely different? And I just remember when I embraced them, it just felt really natural, which was such a relief for me. Uh, and just them reiterating that they're just so grateful that I showed up and that I was just willing to meet up, and even just reminding me that like they're not going anywhere, and that that they really want to continue relationship. And so that's been such a gift in reunifying. I know that's not everybody's experience, um, but I've appreciated that they've just really shown me grace in how I feel like I'm being a little slow to this whole process, but I feel like we have a lifetime ahead, so that's always encouraging.
Yeah, you really do. And it does make sense that you need time to process because this is no small thing. Like reunifying with your biological family is a really big deal. And I'm honored that you're even willing to share with us about this and to let us into this space because this is a very sensitive topic. And I know it's something that you're going through right now as we speak. Like you said, you're taking your time, you're actively walking through it. And I'm sure that comes with a lot of complex emotions and feelings. And I'm just so appreciative that you're even allowing us in this space because you definitely don't owe it to us or to anyone. But even just to be able to hear what your experience has been like and the different emotions that you're processing helps me so much as an adoptive mom to be able to know, okay, these could potentially be things my child or a child that I adopt someday in the future may go through. So I just really appreciate you even sharing with us.
Yeah, and I appreciate this space to process and know that I don't need to arrive somewhere in order to share my story. Um, that's the freedom that I hope within our tribe that we can continue to feel. Is that we're really along for the ride, and yeah, all of that entails.
Yeah, I was going to say, we say all the time, but it's so true that every story is so different because every person is different and our experiences are different. And therefore, you've got three different members of the triad. And so, obviously, like you can't really compare, but it is helpful to be able to learn from someone who has at least been there. So, kind of with that thought in mind, I'd love to hear if you have, let's say, you're having a conversation with an adult adoptee who's kind of on the fringe of deciding whether or not they want to pursue reunification with their biological family or not to. If you just had any advice for them and or for their adoptive parents, what would you say?
Yeah, I think these are kind of what I believe we have to really revisit the narratives that are at play.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so, to an adoptee, as we've mentioned, like every story is different, and that's honestly the beauty of adoption. And I think the questions that I even ask myself of, do they know I exist? Are they going to want to have a relationship with me? Um, Also known as like second rejection. Once we meet, are things going to really click, or is it going to be, in a sense, more harmful for me? Like, I think those are such totally valid observations and questions that an adoptee would ask him or herself as they venture into reunification. But I really hope that as we're pondering these things as adoptees, we have the freedom to do that. And I hope that those questions um, can be said within a safe space, whether that's their adoptive family or friends, because I think that those spaces that are nurtured for us to grow and question um, and learn more about ourselves, and usually as an adult, for those of us who have dealt with closed adoption, is huge, and it's vital for us to feel that we're supported in that way as we venture into something that potentially can be very uncertain, um, and a little scary. but also full of joy and delight potentially as well. And so I think having that hope there is, I think we deal with a lot of grief and loss, but I think there can be hope in reunification. And so I kind of implore, the people and the communities around adoptees can really support us as we, look into more of our birth story and if possible reunification. In regards to adoptive parents, there's also a narrative, and I think there's two. One I would say is if you're an adoptive parent and your son or daughter is looking into reunification at whatever age, and you are questioning if you're going to be replaced,
Mm.
um, which I think is valid. And I think a lot of it is because in the era of closed adoption, I think the language that was used was very transactional. And, it's like, I have something now, I gave you something, and now we're moving forward. And so I think it's totally fair to maybe feel like, oh, well, I can just be simply replaced because they're going back to something. But I feel like that's a very unhealthy narrative. And there's two reasons to that. I think one is we really need to teach ourselves and our children, our adopted children, the beauty of accepting our story. And in accepting our story, we're really deepening our understanding of our own self-worth. And so I think as parents and as adoptees, but specifically as parents, as you're learning, you want your kid or you're trying to teach your kid to accept their story, you in turn have to know that you hold worth in this story as well. And I think as parents, when we start understanding that, we're not replaceable, we're just adding on, or we being invited into a bigger story or more relationships, um, there needn't be fear in that. And so that's one narrative I feel like adoptive parents struggle with, is that fear of like being replaced. But I also think the other narrative is that they're gonna, the more that things start unfolding, maybe they're gonna be angry or resentful, because I think there's some feelings that will come up when you reunify, because I mean you're learning a whole new thing. I think if adoptive parents were nurturing continually within their family, just that idea of like any and all conversations are welcomed in the home, and we're going to be in open communication, and we're going to be learning alongside you. This makes it, I feel, more of like a partnership, and learning together, instead of like, oh, that's my son or daughter's um, desire to reunify, and I'm over here. Like, let's bridge that gap because we're all in it together. And I feel like that's been the gift for me with my adopted mom. My mom, she's been 100% supportive and understanding that she's not being replaced. And I think she knows she's not being replaced is because we've had this open dialogue about reunification. And so she's understanding what I'm going through, you know. And so I think, I don't know, those are kind of the things I think when I maybe hear that adoptive parents are hesitant to allow their adoptee child reunify.
Yeah. I think you made some good
Absolutely.
points about just making space for questions to be asked. It's okay to have questions,
Right.
and having a healthy dialogue about whatever that question is really healthy for you to not feel like those questions are just kind of swirling around in your own mind. Even if
Right.
your parents can't answer those for you, you know what? It's okay to still ask them and still to kind of ponder them together. I think that's really a really helpful piece of information just for me as an adoptive parent thinking through that. Even though my daughter is still young now, she's not going to be young forever.
For
Right.
sure.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, obviously, we've all learned that you're a wealth of wisdom. And obviously, we really appreciate you spending some time just opening up, like Macy said, and sharing with us as you go, I think is really valuable. But what else? I mean, is there anything else you'd like to add to this conversation? Things that you've learned, things that you'd want someone to know, to see from your vantage point? Just anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think just I feel like there's been such a shift recently in our community where new perspectives, and more seats have been added, and I think that's such a gift. And I think as we continue to add more stories and listen to more stories, um, I really hope that we can just continue to create a space where there's freedom to share. And I totally understand, like, it's going to be messy and things are going to get complicated because adoption is messy and complicated. But I think if we have, because we're such a unique community, I think if we just have this understanding that, as messy and as complicated as this can get, like, I'm still here for you and I'm still here for your story that's unfolding. Um, I feel like that's what I want to implore to our friends here and outside, quote unquote, of our community, is that we just continue to really look at what things are being said, and to take it with so much grace and care and compassion. And I hope that just kind of widens not only our triad community, but just widens and deepens our heart for relationship with one another within this community. And I think, that's an important aspect of what we have going on. And I'm so grateful. I feel like I'm just now learning to be more forward and more bold in my story. And it's because I feel like, for the first time in a very long time, my seed has been added. And that's such a deep blessing that I don't take for granted. And so because my seed is there, I feel like that's what propels me to continue to share and to continue to rise up.
And more adoptive parents, I mean, hopefully even with this podcast, I think that, we have a lot to learn and grow. But one thing I think that we can say culturally that seems to be shifting is that adoptive parents really are wanting to hear more and more from adoptees lately. So it's a huge blessing that you're talking. So keep that seat at the table, girl.
Yes, I completely agree with Amy, and I'm so thankful that that seat has been pulled up for you, or that you have grabbed your seat and pulled it up bravely. However, I mean, we could say it from both sides, because for a long time, I know that adoptees and birth parents were not given seats at the table. And I know as an adoptive mom, anytime an adoptee is willing to tell me legitimately anything, I'm like, okay, I'm all ears. I'm here to listen, because we can all learn from each other, and we
Right.
truly are better together, all members of the triad. But for me, lately, I've really tried to prioritize, for the sake of my son, I am going to try to listen to as many adoptee voices and experiences as I possibly can. So I so appreciate you being willing to share with us today.
And also, I feel like you honestly do a really great job sharing on social media, which is, like I said, like how we initially kind of came in touch. So I would like for everyone to know that if you would also like to connect with Sharda on social media, you can find her on Instagram at Sharda Renee. And we'll obviously link that in the show notes, because I know it's hard to, maybe you're driving or whatnot. So don't pull up your phone right yet. But anyway.
Thank you, Shar.
Thank you, guys. This was so great.
Yes, it was.
Well, friends, we're so glad you joined us today. We would be honored if you'd leave us an honest review before you go. You can find us on social media at AdoptWell, and check out our website at www.adoptwell.com. As always, you can find more helpful resources right here in the show notes. We look forward to spending more time with you in the future as we all learn together how we can adopt well.